Hey there, and welcome back, or welcome for the first time. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and how long you've been with me. And if these stories help you sleep, don't forget to subscribe. My name is Rayan. I'm a park ranger in the rugged wilderness of northern Michigan. I took this job to escape my troubles back home in Detroit. The bills piling up, a messy breakup, a general feeling of hopelessness. Out here among the towering pines and crystal blue lakes, I thought I could find peace. But there are dangers in these woods that I never could have imagined. Dangers that I'm only beginning to comprehend now, as I sit huddled in my cabin with a rifle across my lap, watching the tree line and praying for dawn. It started a few weeks ago. I was out on a solo backcountry patrol, hiking a remote stretch of trail near the Dogman Falls. It was a beautiful fall day, the air crisp and the leaves a riot of reds and golds. But as I walked, I began to get the uncanny feeling that I was being watched. The forest was dead silent. No bird calls, no skittering of small animals in the underbrush, just an oppressive, watchful stillness. The back of my neck prickled. I scanned the dense wall of trees on either side of the trail, but saw nothing. When I stopped to fill my water bottle at a stream, I noticed the first print. It was pressed deep into a muddy patch of bank, 4 toes, clawed, at least 6 inches across, some sort of large canid. At first I assumed wolf, but there hadn't been a confirmed wolf sighting in this part of the state in decades. Then I saw the second print a few yards downstream, and the third. A chill rippled down my spine. These weren't wolf tracks. They were too big. The stride was all wrong. What the hell could possibly be leaving prints like these? I hurried back to the trail, suddenly eager to finish my patrol and get back to civilization. That's when I heard it. A distant, drawn-out howl that made the hair on my arm stand up. It was a chilling sound, somehow both canine and yet eerily human-like. Gooseflesh rippled across my skin. I scanned the forest in the direction of the howl, my heart pounding. For a split second I thought I glimpsed a dark shape ducking between the trees on a distant ridge, watching me. Then it was gone, and the forest was silent once more. With a shaking hand, I unholstered my sidearm and started quickly back down the trail, eager to put as much distance between myself and whatever I'd seen as possible. Little did I know that this was only the beginning of my nightmare, the beginning of my obsession with what I've come to know as the Michigan Dogman. In the days following my encounter on the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I was jumpy on edge. I scanned the trees on my patrols, searched for tracks, listened for any sign of that unearthly howl, but the forest revealed nothing. Still, something felt off. The normal sounds and rhythms of the woods were muted. The very air seemed to hum with tension. Gradually, reports began trickling in from hikers and hunters, reports of a strange creature glimpsed between the trees, a huge, upright shadow, like a bear, but moving more fluidly, more intelligently. Always at a distance, always vanishing before a clear look could be gotten. Then the campsite was found. It looked like a bomb had gone off. 2 tents shredded, sleeping bags and gear strewn in a 50-foot radius. Food wrappers and debris everywhere. And blood. A lot of blood. We found drag marks leading away into the forest. 2 sets of tracks. Human feet, barefoot and stumbling, dwarfed by the deep clawed prints of some massive canid creature. They disappeared into the woods and were not seen again. A sense of dread settled over the park like a fog. As a ranger, it was my job to keep people safe, but how could I protect them from something like this? Some creature straight out of a nightmare, a monster. I threw myself into research, scouring the internet for any information on upright canids, on strange creatures spotted in the woods of the upper Midwest. Late at night in my cabin, I read report after report. There were the famous Michigan Dogman sightings from the 1970s. A strange bipedal canine glimpsed along lonely country roads. Then older stories, legends from the Odawa and Ojibwe tribes of the Wendigo, an evil spirit that could possess humans or animals, a spindly, long-limbed creature with a deer skull for a head and an insatiable hunger for human flesh. Was this what I was dealing with? Some hungry spirit haunting the woods? Or was there a more mundane explanation? A wolf-dog hybrid, an unusually large bear, a human killer in an elaborate costume? I needed answers, and I believed I knew where to start looking. There was one particular stretch of land within the park, a densely forested valley accessible only by a little-used hiking trail. All of the sightings seemed to cluster around this area. If there was any truth to the legend of the Michigan Dogman, any flesh-and-blood creature behind the stories, I would find my proof there. I had to go into the valley, into the heart of the creature's territory, even if it meant putting my life on the line and facing my worst nightmare. I set out at dawn, fog curling between the dark trunks of the trees. A heavy mist blanketed the forest, turning it into a landscape of shifting grays. I felt like I was the only human for 100 miles. The eerie silence of the woods pressed in on me as I hiked. My pack was heavy with supplies, and my rifle was a reassuring weight in my hands. But even with a weapon, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being stalked by some unseen predator. As I moved deeper into the Dogman's supposed territory, I began to see the signs. Snapped branches, atypical trail markers. I found a bush stripped of berries, deep gouges torn into the surrounding tree trunks. Territorial markings. The mist began to burn off and shafts of sunlight slanted through the leaves. In a clearing, I made a chilling discovery. Animal bones scattered across a broad flat boulder. Tangles of hide and tufts of fur. Deer. Raccoon. Adult black bear. No natural predator could take down a full-grown bear or strip the flesh so completely from the bones. My hands shook as I photographed the scene. This was the lair of an apex predator, something intelligent and ruthlessly cunning. I pressed on, even as every instinct screamed at me to turn back. The feeling of being watched intensified, a physical weight between my shoulder blades. The forest blurred into a monotonous smear of browns and greens. My mind played tricks. The flash of a dark shape in my peripheral vision, there and gone. When the attack came, it was terrifyingly swift. A crash of underbrush, a dark blur launching from the shadows. I raised my rifle, but it was on me before I could fire, a wall of coarse fur and surging muscle and snapping teeth. The creature towered over me, impossibly tall for a canid, 8 feet at least. Shaggy fur, a coat of brindle black and gray. But it wasn't the size or the fur that froze the scream in my throat. It was the eyes, glowing amber and horribly human in their gaze, intelligent, knowing. With a swipe of one huge paw, it sent my rifle flying. I scrambled back on hands and feet, my mind blank with terror. The creature surveyed me, head tilted, tongued its black lips. Then it reared up on its hind legs, seemed to catch a scent on the wind. It shot me one last unreadable look, a disturbingly human gleam in its eyes. Then it loped off on 2 legs into the trees, vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. I lay there shaking, scarcely breathing. Blood trickled from my leg where its claws had grazed me. Those eyes burned in my mind, that knowing, almost mocking gaze. There could be no more doubt. The Michigan Dogman was real, and I had just come face to face with it and survived. But for how much longer? The gash on my leg pulsed with pain. First blood had been drawn. Out here, miles from civilization, I was easy prey. The hunt was on. And this time I had the terrible feeling I was the quarry. I ran, fled blindly through the woods, imagining I could hear the creature's panting breath behind me, the thud of its paws. Bitter adrenaline flooded my veins. I thought I knew these woods, but panic turned the trees into a disorienting maze. My lungs burned and my damaged leg throbbed. The forest canopy spun above me, flashes of mocking blue. When I finally stumbled out onto a Park Service road, I was miles off my planned route, turned around and half delirious. I limped for what felt like hours before I heard the blessed sound of an engine. It was a pair of campers in an old pickup truck who found me. They got me into the truck bed, drove me to the nearest ranger station. I was shaking, babbling, my words spilling out in a rush as I tried to describe what I'd seen. The rangers exchanged glances, shock maybe, pity. They thought I was crazy. Hell, maybe I was. If I hadn't seen the creature with my own eyes, felt its hot breath, I wouldn't have believed it myself. I was taken to the hospital, treated for dehydration and mild blood loss. When I tried to tell my story, I was handled with that gentle wariness reserved for head cases and fabulists. They scribbled notes on clipboards, asked about my drinking habits, my mental health history, suggested I was overworked, that maybe I needed a break from the stresses of the job. I could see what they were thinking. The lonely park ranger, too long in the deep woods, cracking up, seeing things. But I knew what I'd seen. It was real, even if no one believed me. I bullied the doctors into releasing me, loaded up on medical supplies and headed back to my cabin, my leg hastily stitched and bandaged. I knew the protocol for animal attacks. I'd be put on leave, taken off patrols while fish and wildlife investigated. But I couldn't step away. Not now. Not with that thing still out there. As I drove, I made a plan. I would hole up in my cabin, let my leg heal. Then I would go back into the creature's territory, but this time I'd be prepared. Trail cams, traps, infrared sensors. I would get hard evidence of the Dogman's existence. And I would stop it, one way or another, before it could hurt anyone else, before it could draw more blood. No one else would believe the danger until they saw it for themselves. So it was up to me. I tried not to think about those eyes, that cunning gaze so full of malicious intelligence. Had the creature known exactly what it was doing when it let me escape? Had it wanted me to spread the story, to be doubted and dismissed as a madman? Was this all some sort of twisted game to it? A hunt with only one possible outcome? As I pulled up to the cabin, the sun was setting, bathing the trees in a bloody orange glow. Twilight settled over the woods like a shroud. Somewhere out there, hidden by shadows and mist, I knew the Dogman was waiting, watching. It had my scent now, and I had the terrible certainty it wouldn't stop until one of us was dead. The days blurred together as I healed, a haze of pain and paranoia. I installed my makeshift security system. Cameras pointed at the tree line, fishing line tripwires rigged with bells, a police scanner crackling quietly in the background. Sleep came in ragged snatches. I jolted awake at every nighttime sound, the hoot of an owl, the creak of a branch. My dreams were plagued by flashes of brindle fur and glowing eyes. Food tasted like ashes. Silence yawned around me like a living thing, the absence of human voices turning the world hollow and unreal. It was just me, and it, the Dogman, lurking beyond the circle of light cast by the cabin, biding its time. During long sleepless nights, I compulsively scoured the internet for information on the creature. Sightings across the state going back decades, mostly dismissed as hoaxes or cases of mistaken identity. But what if it wasn't a local legend? What if the Michigan Dogman was part of something larger? I followed shaky threads: the Bray Road Beast, the Ozark Howler, the Beast of Seven Chutes. Scattered reports of creatures like the one I'd seen, stretching back beyond recorded history. An ancient primal fear stitched into our collective subconscious. What if these creatures were the evolutionary remnants of some prehistoric divergent canid species, surviving in the shadows of civilization, rarely seen, taking humans only when the opportunity arose? Cunning predators biding their time until their prey made a fatal mistake. The thoughts clawed at my mind, made my skin itch with a constant sense of being hunted. Watched. I jumped at shadows. Hands shook as I checked and rechecked my cameras, my traps. At night, beyond the salt line, I poured around the cabin's perimeter. I imagined I could hear it. A rustle of underbrush, the pad of paws circling, patient and inexorable as dusk. When would it come for me? The waiting was almost worse than the knowing. I cleaned my rifle over and over, an apotropaic ritual, counted bullets, planned for the inevitable, but even I wasn't prepared for it that night. The moon was a bone-colored sliver, the air heavy and portentous. I was lying awake, staring at shadows, when I heard the telltale creak of the porch stairs. A soft whine, almost a whimper. Some animal in distress. Despite myself, my ranger instincts kicked in. I rose, took my gun, moved to the window, and saw it. Not the Dogman, something smaller, more pitiful. It took a moment for my brain to process what I was seeing. A dog, a ragged German shepherd, horribly thin, fur matted with blood and burrs. It limped up the steps, favoring one paw, leaving dark streaks behind. For a moment, just a moment, I let myself relax. Some half-wild dog, injured and starving, seeking shelter. There was my rational explanation, my mundane answer to all of this. But then it raised its head, looked right at me through the window with eyes that glowed amber in the moonlight. Eyes horribly knowing and human and gleaming with sly, predatory intelligence. The dog grinned, tongue lolling between yellow teeth, and in that moment, in that awful glinting of eyes and teeth, I knew. Knew with a blind, bowel-watering certainty. It had found me. It was here. The Dogman had come for me at last. I stumbled back from the window, suddenly clumsy with terror. The Dogman's grin stretched impossibly wide, its form rippling and distorting in the moonlight. The porch groaned under its weight as it stalked closer, growing larger with each step until it filled the window, too big, far too big to be any earthly dog. It reared up on its hind legs and its form seemed to unfurl, that brindle fur, shaggy and bristling. I grabbed for my gun with numb hands, tried to remember how to breathe. This was it. This was the moment of truth, the final confrontation. The creature had toyed with me long enough, drawn out the game, and now it had come to finish the hunt. I raised my rifle, sighted down the barrel with shaking hands. Center mass, aim for center mass, just like my training. But when I met the Dogman's eyes over the iron sights, my finger froze on the trigger. There was something in those eyes, not just intelligence, but understanding. A horrible knowing amusement, as if it could sense my fear, savor it like a fine wine. It knew I couldn't pull the trigger, knew I was paralyzed, caught between fight and flight. It threw back its head and howled, a chilling, ululating cry that shattered the night. In that moment I felt a horrible kinship with the creature, because beneath the fear, beneath the revulsion, there was a part of me that wanted to howl too, to give in to the wildness, the savagery. The Dogman lunged, faster than thought, faster than should have been possible for something that size. It crashed through the window in an explosion of wood and glass. I felt the recoil of the rifle butt against my shoulder, heard the blast of the shot thunderous in the small space of the cabin, smelled the acrid stink of gunpowder, but it just kept coming, a tidal wave of blood-matted fur and snapping jaws. It slammed into me with the force of a battering ram, sent me flying. My head cracked against the wall and stars exploded across my vision. The gun skittered away, useless. The creature loomed over me, its bulk filling my blurring eyesight. Hot carrion breath blasted my face. I could feel the heat of it, the solidity, so much more terribly real than the half-glimpsed shadow in the woods. This was it, then. This was how I died. I thought of all the times I'd walked through the forest and felt so small beneath the ancient baleful glare of the trees. Now I was small again, so terribly small and fragile and utterly at the mercy of the wildness I had foolishly thought I could tame. The Dogman's jaws opened wide, strings of drool webbing between dagger teeth. I braced for the crunch of bone, the bright flare of pain. But the bite didn't come, it just stared down at me, pinning me with that amber gaze. And in the depths of those alien, too human eyes I saw, what? Not bloodlust, not even animal hunger, but something colder and far more terrifying. I saw recognition, a horrible sentience. I saw cunning, cruel in its intensity. I saw the weight of centuries in that feral stare, an ancient malice that mocked everything I was, everything I had ever hoped to be. The stink of its breath made me gag, but I could not look away. It could have killed me in an instant, but it didn't. Instead, it leaned close, lips pulling back over its teeth. Almost a smile, if such a thing could be said to smile. It huffed a breath, blisteringly hot against my cheek, gave a low, chuffing growl that in my delirium almost sounded like laughter. Then it turned, slunk back towards the shattered window with a languorous, liquid grace that was somehow worse than its speed. In the aperture it paused, threw a look back over one shaggy shoulder, holding my gaze for a long, terrible moment. Then it was gone, a dark blur swallowed by the night, leaving me broken and bloody on the floor of my ruined cabin, my sanity fracturing like the glass littering the ground. I don't know how long I lay there, long enough for the shadows to change, for a gray and haggard dawn to leach color back into the world, long enough for the pounding of my heart to slow, for the ringing in my ears to fade into a dull roar. When I finally managed to stand, I didn't recognize myself in the mirror, features washed pale and eyes hollow. I looked like I had aged a decade in a night, a lifetime. There was blood on my shirt, my face. My hands shook. Slowly, moving like a sleepwalker, I began to pack a bag. Only the essentials: food, water purification tablets, first aid kit, my backup sidearm. With each item I felt a cold, crystalline determination taking hold. I couldn't stay here. Not now, with the cabin's illusion of safety shattered beyond repair. Not with the knowledge of what lurked in the woods, a nightmare made flesh. I had to get out, get help, regroup. But even as I made my plan, I knew the bitter truth. There was no escaping this, no unseeing what I had seen or unknowing what I now knew. The Michigan Dogman was real, and it had marked me, chosen me for its own inscrutable purposes. This wasn't over, it was just beginning. And God help me, but there was a dark and vicious part of me that felt a fierce, feral joy at the thought. As I stepped out into the pale dawn light, the trees closed around me like a living thing, watchful and waiting. I didn't look back at the cabin, the wreckage of my old life. My path lay ahead, into the wildness and the shadow, into the unknown. The Dogman was out there, stalking, hunting, hungry, and heaven help any that crossed its path, or mine. My name is Peter Walker, and I've been a park ranger for the past decade. It's a lonely job, patrolling vast swaths of remote wilderness, but I've always felt a connection to nature and a drive to help others. Growing up in rural Montana, I spent most of my childhood exploring the dense pine forests and rugged mountains that surrounded our small town. While other kids were glued to their video games, I was out tracking animals, learning survival skills, and dreaming of adventure. But adventure doesn't pay the bills. After high school, I floundered for a few years, working odd jobs to make ends meet. College was too expensive and nothing else really called to me. That is, until I stumbled across a flyer for seasonal park ranger openings. It felt like destiny. I applied immediately and, to my shock, got the position. That was 10 years ago. Since then, I've worked at national parks and forests across the country, from the swamps of Florida to the deserts of New Mexico. I love the work, even if the pay is meager. There's something deeply satisfying about rescuing lost hikers, maintaining trails, and preserving these stunning natural spaces for generations to come. Of course, there are challenges too. Harsh weather, dangerous wildlife, long stretches of solitude. But I thought I could handle anything. That is, until I took the post at Shoshone National Forest in Wyoming. When I arrived for my first day, the retiring ranger I was replacing looked ragged. There was a haunted look in his eyes as he shook my hand. "You watch yourself out there," he said gruffly. "Stick to the trails and don't go out after dark. Ain't safe." I laughed it off at the time, figuring he was just trying to scare the rookie. I'd encountered my share of ornery bears and disoriented hikers in my day, but looking back, I'd soon learned that I had no idea what real danger was. Because deep in the ancient woods of Shoshone, a malevolent force was lurking. The locals had a name for it, whispered around campfires and bar stools. They called it the Dogman, and it was hungry. I settled into my new post with the confidence of a seasoned ranger. The breathtaking beauty of Shoshone was like nowhere I'd been before. Towering lodgepole pines, windswept mountain meadows, crystal-clear alpine lakes. It was truly a paradise for hikers, campers, and nature lovers. For the first few weeks, my job was exactly what I expected, manning the visitor center, giving directions, and occasionally helping with a turned ankle or missing child. But then the stories started trickling in. Campers reporting strange sounds outside their tents at night, eerie howls that sounded almost human, giant footprints on trails, far too big to be a wolf or mountain lion, park guests that went into the backcountry and never came out. I assured concerned visitors that there was nothing to worry about. Black bears and elk could sound strange in the night, and people often got turned around on hikes. Still, something in the back of my mind nagged at me. The look in that old ranger's eyes, the palpable fear behind the wild tales. Then came the Patterson incident. A family of 4, mom, dad, and 2 young kids, failed to check in after a 2-night camping trip along Aspen Creek. It wasn't totally unusual. Cell service was spotty, and people often extended their stay to enjoy the scenery. But when their car was still in the parking lot on day 3, I knew I needed to investigate. I gathered my gear and headed out, following the trail along the rushing creek. About 2 miles in, I began to get a sinking feeling deep in my gut. Something was wrong. The forest was too quiet, devoid of the usual bird song and chipmunk chatter. A strange, musky scent hung in the damp air. As I rounded a bend, my heart nearly stopped. The family's campsite was in shambles, tent shredded, sleeping bags scattered, supplies strewn about as if a tornado had ripped through, and the blood. So much blood splashed across the dirt and soaked into the nylon. No bodies, no tracks, no sign of the Pattersons. I radioed for backup, barely able to choke out the words. It was like a scene from a horror movie. When the investigation team arrived, I watched in a daze as they cordoned off the site and began collecting evidence. But I already knew deep down that they wouldn't find anything. Whatever had done this was no ordinary animal, and it was still out there. That night, as I tried in vain to sleep in my cabin, the howls began, rising from the darkness of the forest like a macabre symphony, howls that sounded like the cries of a man and the snarls of a beast. After the Patterson disappearance, everything changed. The forest no longer felt like a sanctuary to me. It had become a place of primal terror where an unspeakable creature roamed free. I threw myself into the search, scouring miles of dense wilderness for any sign of the missing family. But as the days turned into weeks with no leads, a grim reality set in. The Pattersons were gone, vanished into thin air, and I feared that the thing responsible would soon strike again. Local tribes had long spoken of a creature they called the Wendigo, a malevolent spirit that could possess humans and turn them into cannibalistic monsters. Another name whispered was Skinwalker, a shape-shifting witch of Navajo lore. But the one that sent chills down my spine was Dogman, a beast that was half human, half wolf, with a taste for human flesh. I delved into the history of Shoshone, trying to uncover any clues about this alleged cryptid. What I found only deepened my unease. Stories of mysterious disappearances and grisly killings stretched back decades, even centuries. Fur trappers that never returned. A family of settlers brutally slain in their cabin. More recently, a few scattered missing persons reports, explained away as bear attacks or lost hikers. But I knew there was a pattern, a predator that had stalked these woods for generations, never caught, never stopped. As the summer wore on, sightings and encounters grew. Hikers reported being stalked by an enormous bipedal creature covered in dark fur. A biology researcher claimed she saw glowing red eyes staring at her from the forest at night. And the howls continued, blood-curdling, almost intelligible, like a mockery of humankind. But nothing could prepare me for my own encounter with the Dogman. It was a cool September evening, and I was walking the perimeter of a campground, making sure all fires were out before heading back to my cabin. Without warning, a putrid stench filled my nostrils, like rotting flesh and wet animal fur. The hairs on my neck stood up. Something was watching me. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line with my flashlight. At first I saw nothing. Then a pair of crimson eyes emerged from the darkness, glowing like embers. My heart pounded in my ears. I raised my light, hands trembling, and caught a glimpse of the creature. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall, with a body that was a grotesque mix of man and wolf. Powerful legs ending in clawed paws, a barreled torso with muscled, almost human arms, and the head, a long wolf-like muzzle filled with jagged teeth, yet twisted and distorted, as if trying to take the shape of a man's face. For a moment, we stared at each other, primal fear meeting insatiable hunger. Then the beast reared back its head and let out a howl that shook me to my core, an unearthly, tortured cry of furious craving. I turned and ran faster than I ever had before, blind panic propelling me through the woods. Branches slapped my face and tore at my clothes, but I didn't stop, expecting at any moment to feel the creature's hot breath and piercing fangs at my back. But the attack never came. When I finally reached my cabin, gasping and spent, the night was silent. The Dogman had let me live, for now. After my encounter with the Dogman, all thoughts of leaving Shoshone evaporated. I was the only thing standing between this ravenous beast and the hapless tourists, campers, and residents that visited the forest. If I abandoned my post, there would be a slaughter. But I was in over my head, and I knew it. I began to research the Dogman legend in earnest, tracking down every scrap of information I could find. According to most accounts, the creature was once a man, transformed into a horrible monster through dark magic, a curse, or even a satanic pact. Some speculated it was the twisted result of an experiment gone wrong. Others claimed it was an ancient being, neither man nor beast, that had existed for centuries, feeding on human flesh and fear. But why had it become so brazen now, attacking and snatching victims with impunity? As I dug deeper, a chilling theory emerged. The Dogman was not one creature, but many. Humans that had been bitten or scratched by the beast and survived were doomed to become dogmen themselves, mindless slaves to the curse's insatiable hunger. The part of the legend everyone had gotten wrong was assuming there was only one. An entire pack of these monsters could be stalking the wilderness. I knew I needed help, but who would believe me? I had no evidence except a shaky story and a few blurry footprint photos. Going to the authorities or media would just get me laughed out of the room, or worse, fired and institutionalized. And every day I hesitated, I knew another innocent soul could be devoured. That's when I started finding the dead animals, mutilated elk and deer, even a grizzly bear, ripped apart and partially eaten, their carcasses left like gory billboards. At each kill site, enormous tracks left no doubt about the culprit. The Dogman was leaving me messages, taunting my inability to stop it. With every discovery, my resolve hardened. I would find a way to kill this thing, even if it cost me everything. I began to arm myself however I could. I requisitioned a high-powered hunting rifle and a shotgun from the ranger station, claiming I needed them for nuisance bears. I fashioned vicious spears out of sturdy branches and silver blades melted down from antique silverware. According to the lore, silver was one of the only things that could hurt beasts like the Dogman. I set traps in areas I knew the creature frequented, not to catch it, but to slow it down and give me a fighting chance if I met it again. All the while, I put on a facade for my coworkers and the oblivious tourists. Just good old Ethan, the friendly ranger, always ready with a smile and a trail recommendation. Inside, a storm of fear and determination raged. I knew I was being reckless, that I should reach out for support. But the thought of one more family ripped to shreds, one more child dragged screaming into the night, drove me forward. As the leaves turned golden and the nights grew colder, I sensed a confrontation was brewing. In my dreams, the creature's eyes mocked me, its howls echoing through my skull. "Come and find me," it seemed to taunt. "Let's end this." October brought an early snowfall to Shoshone, blanketing the forest in crystalline white. With it came a deceptive quiet. Most of the animals had migrated or gone to ground, and all but the hardiest hikers stayed home. For a moment I wondered if the Dogman had left too, seeking easier prey. But deep down I knew better. The beast was still there, watching and waiting. Then the Walton family went missing. They were avid outdoorsmen, a father and his 2 teenage sons, out for an ambitious late-season camping trip in the heart of the wilderness. When they didn't return, the man's wife was frantic, insisting something terrible had happened. The authorities wrote them off quickly. Just another case of overconfident men getting lost in the unforgiving cold. But I knew the truth. The Wendigo had claimed more victims. Under the guise of joining the search and rescue operation, I ventured into the backcountry alone, heavily armed and brimming with grim purpose. I no longer cared about being fired or locked up. All that mattered was putting an end to the Dogman's reign of terror, once and for all. As I trudged through the snow-laden forest, an eerie mist swirled through the pines, obscuring the weak autumn sun. The air was laden with an unsettling silence, the only sounds the crunch of my boots and the occasional crack of a distant branch. Despite the cold, sweat trickled down my back. Every fiber of my being screamed danger. About 3 miles in, I found the first signs of violence. A shredded backpack snagged on a branch, its contents scattered across the snow. Blood, rust red against the white, led off the trail in a macabre path. With my rifle at the ready, I followed, scanning the trees for movement. The scene I stumbled into next will haunt me forever. In a small clearing, the mangled remains of the Walton men lay strewn about like broken dolls. Limbs bent at impossible angles, flesh rent from bone, viscera steaming in the frigid air. The snow around them was trampled and soaked scarlet, a clear sign of an intense struggle. They had fought to the last, but it was the smallest detail that sent ice through my heart. Jutting from the torn remnants of a jacket, white as the snow and razor-sharp, was a shard of bone. A human bone, gnawed at the ends. The Dogman was devolving, giving in fully to its monstrous urges. No longer content to merely kill, it was feeding. I knew I had to act fast. It wouldn't take long for the beast to catch the scent of fresh prey in its territory. But as I knelt to examine the tracks, a blood-curdling howl split the air, far closer than I'd ever heard before. I spun, raising my gun with shaking hands. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood the Dogman, but not as I had seen it before. Its form was twisted and grotesque, bulging with unnatural muscle, its fur matted with blood and viscera. Those hellish red eyes bore into me, alight with malice and insatiable hunger. And in its clawed grip, still feebly struggling, was a small blood-soaked child. The youngest Walton boy, no more than 8 years old. The creature's jaws split into a wretched approximation of a grin, needle-like teeth dripping crimson. It lifted the boy towards its maw, and I screamed, opening fire in a burst of desperate rage. But even as the bullets tore through flesh and bone, and the creature roared in pain, I knew I was too late. Too late for the boy, too late for the Waltons, and maybe too late for us all. The fight was a blur of blood and pain and primal terror. The bullet slowed the Dogman, sent it staggering back into the tree line, but didn't stop it. With an agility that defied its size, it lunged at me, claws outstretched and jaws slavering. I barely had time to pull my silver-tipped spear before it was on me. We crashed to the forest floor in a snarling, thrashing tangle. Hot, fetid breath washed over me as I struggled to keep the thing's snapping jaws from my throat. Its strength was unbelievable, muscles straining against my feeble human frame. I knew I had seconds before it overpowered me. With a desperate cry, I drove my spear up, felt it pierce thick hide and bury deep in the monster's chest. The Dogman reared back with an ear-splitting howl, black ichor spurting from the wound. But it was far from finished. With a vicious swipe, it sent me flying, my spear still lodged in its body. I hit a tree with a sickening crunch, white-hot agony exploding through my side. Fractured ribs, maybe worse. The rifle had been knocked from my hands and my shotgun was pinned beneath me. As my vision swam, I saw the beast tear the spear free with a guttural roar and toss it aside like a twig. Then it fixed its burning gaze on me and stalked forward, murder in its eyes. I fumbled for my knife, my last pitiful weapon, knowing it would barely buy me a second. This was the end, the brutal, bloody finale to my long hunt. But as the Dogman loomed over me, jaws dripping, a strange thing happened. From the forest all around, more howls arose, but not the unearthly cries of the beast before me. These were deeper, more resonant, howls of challenge and fury. The Dogman paused, head cocked as if listening. Then to my shock it backed away, a whine of what almost sounded like fear escaping its throat. From the mist-shrouded trees, dark shapes emerged. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, vision blurred by pain and blood loss. But as they drew closer, I saw the truth, and it filled me with a whole new kind of terror. Wolves, a whole pack of them, the largest I'd ever seen. Their eyes glowed in the gathering gloom, coats silvered by moonlight and mist. They paced forward slowly, purposefully, hackles raised and lips curled back to reveal gleaming teeth. But they weren't focused on me. Their attention was fixed solely on the Dogman. The creature backed away, head lowered and body tensed as if to spring. A low, threatening growl rumbled from its chest, but it was outnumbered, and it knew it. The wolves fanned out, circling their prey, moving with the coordination of a well-honed killing machine. I watched, heart pounding, as the lead wolf lunged, powerful jaws clamping down on the Dogman's foreleg. The monster roared in pain and rage, swiping with its free arm, but the wolf danced back, leaving glistening red streaks in its wake. Then the pack descended on it like a furry tide. It was a scene out of a primordial nightmare, a seething mass of fangs and claws and flying fur, the snarls and yelps and howls echoing through the forest. The Dogman fought with the fury of the damned, flinging wolves aside like rag dolls, painting the snow red with its wounds. But for everyone, it felt, another leapt forward to take its place, harrying it from all sides. For the second time that day, I was sure I was about to witness a slaughter, but not the one I expected. As the wolves tore into their unnatural enemy, I began to crawl inch by agonizing inch towards where my rifle lay in the churned-up snow. If I could just reach it, put a silver bullet in the thing while it was distracted. But before I could close my hands around the stock, a long, mournful howl cut through the snarling din, a cry of finality and despair. I looked up to see the Dogman, a ravaged, blood-drenched ruin, sink to its knees as if in supplication. The wolves drew back, still growling, red tongues lolling. Then the beast threw its head back and let loose one last ululating wail that seemed to hold all the tortured humanity it had lost, before pitching forward into the stained snow and lying still. Its form began to crumble in front of my disbelieving eyes, flesh sloughing away to reveal splintered white bone, dissolving back into the ancient soil of Shoshone as if it had never been. But not before I glimpsed its face one last time, and beneath the twisted wolf-like visage, I could have sworn I saw the pain-racked features of a man. The wolves turned their attention to me then, and I tensed, scrabbling for my gun, sure I was to be their next victim. But after a pregnant pause, the lead wolf huffed out a breath that sounded almost like an exasperated sigh. Then it turned and loped off into the forest, the rest of the pack melting silently away behind it like mist. I lay there amidst the carnage for a small eternity, trying to process the impossible things I had seen, to reconcile the fact that I was alive. It was over. The beast was gone, the curse broken, and yet I knew with a bone-deep certainty that I would never be free of it. The Dogman would haunt my steps for the rest of my days. They found me hours later laden with wounds and incoherently babbling about monsters. My career, my reputation, my sanity, all were irreparably damaged. But the killing stopped, and the people were safe. And in the end, isn't that what matters? The forest keeps its secrets, and the legend will fade in time, explained away as a bear attack or a deranged hermit. But I'll always be watching the tree line, because I know the truth. There are older, darker things than us in this world, and they're always hungry. Living alone in a rustic cabin deep in the remote forests of northern Minnesota, the life of a park ranger suited me well. I've always been drawn to nature's untamed beauty and solitude. As a kid growing up in the suburbs of Minneapolis, I spent every spare moment exploring the trails and lakes of nearby state parks, imagining myself as a rugged outdoorsman protecting the wilderness. But dreams of adventure don't pay the bills, and after high school I found myself drowning in student loan debt from a half-finished forestry degree. Desperate for a steady paycheck, I applied for seasonal park ranger positions all over the country. When Voyageurs National Park offered me a full-time backcountry patrol job, I jumped at the opportunity. I sold most of my possessions, packed up my old pickup truck, and headed north. The first few months were idyllic. I loved the quiet mornings canoeing across vast mist-shrouded lakes and hiking through ancient pine forests. Most visitors were friendly families and retirees in RVs who needed occasional directions or first aid. But as the summer crowds thinned and the days grew shorter, an uneasy feeling crept over me. The isolation that once attracted me to the job now felt oppressive. Strange sounds echoed through the night, not the usual wolves or loons, but guttural snarls and heavy footfalls that made the hair on my neck stand up. In the morning I sometimes found large dog-like tracks circling my cabin. When I reported it to my supervisor, he shrugged it off as a lone wolf displaced by logging, but something felt unnatural about the prints, almost human. As the leaves turned and the first snows dusted the ground, the sightings grew more frequent. Hikers reported fleeting glimpses of a massive furry creature lurking in the underbrush. Campers complained of a foul stench and eerie howls around their tents at night. Pets and livestock at the perimeter of the park began to go missing. I started to dread my backcountry patrols, watching the tree line nervously as I hiked overgrown trails and checked permit boxes at remote campsites. Every shadow and snapped twig made me reach for the bear spray on my belt. At night, I lay awake, clutching my grandfather's old hunting rifle, wondering what I had gotten myself into. This was no longer the benign wilderness of my childhood fantasies. This was a flickering frontier where mankind's dominion ended and older, darker forces still held sway. As the bizarre incidents mounted, I dug into old newspapers and historical archives at the local library, trying to find some precedent for what was happening. What I found sent a chill up my spine. The Dogman, a bipedal canid creature with the strength of a bear and uncanny intelligence, had haunted Voyageurs and the surrounding areas for generations. Native Ojibwe tribes had long told stories of the Wendigo, a malevolent spirit that could possess humans or animals, grotesquely morphing them into an insatiable predator. French fur trappers in the 1700s recorded run-ins with loup-garous, wolfmen who prowled the boreal forests. In the 1970s, a rash of Dogman sightings around a nearby town had ended in a gruesome series of unsolved murders. At first, I scoffed at the old legends, dismissing them as backwoods superstitions and tall tales. But alone in my isolated cabin, poring over grainy photos of mangled livestock and historical woodcuts of wolfmen, I felt my skepticism slipping. The Dogman sightings had surged every 30, 50 years, almost like clockwork, going back centuries. Now it seemed to be happening again, and I was stuck in the middle of it. The trickle of reports turned into a flood as fall turned to winter. Ravaged deer carcasses, garbage strewn through ransacked campsites, a bear ripped to pieces as if by another massive predator. The few hikers I encountered looked haggard and skittish, jumping at every noise in the gray skeletal woods. Most took one look at the fresh tracks in the mud and fled. I didn't blame them. With the park all but deserted, I was left to patrol alone, watching over 1,000,000 acres of wilderness with a dwindling can of bear spray and an old bolt-action rifle. Each day I found more signs of the creature's passage: broken branches, clawed trees, shredded bits of fur and bone, growing ever closer to my own cabin. I radioed the ranger's station to plead for backup, but my supervisor brushed it off, blaming black bears fattening up for hibernation. The exasperated tone in his voice told me he thought I was losing it. But I knew what bears could do, and this wasn't it. This was something larger, more vicious, something unnatural. As a full moon rose over a fresh dusting of December snow, I resolved to get to the bottom of it. I strapped on my snowshoes, slung my rifle over my shoulder, and headed out to track the creature. If I could document proof of its existence, maybe I could convince someone, anyone, to help before it was too late. Little did I realize I was walking into a confrontation I was woefully unprepared for. The full moon illuminated the snow-draped forest in a ghostly blue pall as I set off from my cabin, following the creature's meandering tracks. The heavy footprints, easily twice the size of a man's, wove between the trees and plunged down ravines with unsettling agility. No natural animal moved like that. As I slowly stalked through the woods, the normal night sounds, the hoot of an owl, the skitter of small animals, faded to an oppressive silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The only sound was the soft crunch of my snowshoes and the hammering of my own heart. After what felt like hours navigating the lunar landscape, I reached a small clearing and found a scene of carnage. A bull moose, a massive animal that could weigh over 1,000 pounds, lay disemboweled in a pink spray of snow. Huge bite marks scored its thick neck, nearly decapitating it. Clumps of shaggy fur and torn flanks steamed in the icy air. Nothing left behind to kill like that. Elation and terror warred within me as I fumbled in my pockets for a camera. I had to document this, to prove I wasn't just another unhinged, over-imaginative ranger. But my shaking hands dropped the camera into the trampled, gore-streaked snow. As I bent to pick it up, a guttural growl shattered the silence behind me. I spun, drawing my rifle, and found myself face to face with the Dogman. It was humanoid, but on all fours, its heavily muscled limbs too long and misshapen to be a man in a costume. Wiry fur was matted with blood and detritus. Its elongated head tapered to a wolf-like snout lined with jagged teeth. But the eyes were the worst part. Amber and intelligent, almost sentient, and blazing with malevolence. For a paralyzing second we stared at each other, the creature's hot breath clouding the air between us. Some feral instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew it would be on me in an instant. With a shaking hand, I aimed at the grotesque head and fired. The shot went wide as the creature lunged, hitting it in the shoulder with a spray of blood and fur. But it barely slowed the beast down. I was hit with a wall of hot breath and ripping claws, my rifle torn from my hands as I fell backwards into the churned-up snow. The creature roared, baring its teeth in a vicious rictus grin as it reared up to its full height, preparing to disembowel me just like the moose. In desperation, I grabbed a handful of snow and flung it at the creature's eyes, taking advantage of the split second of blindness to roll away. I plunged into the skeletal tree line in as a wild, directionless sprint, snow-laden branches lashing my face. A bellowing howl echoed behind me, a promise of relentless pursuit and certain death. My snowshoes were in tatters and my lungs burned as I crashed through drifts and deadfall, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and the creature. Every shadow seemed to conceal a loping silhouette. Every snarl of the wind mimicked a predator's heavy breathing behind me. Reason devolved into animal panic. After an interminable adrenaline and terror-fueled flight, the ground dropped out from under me and I was sent tumbling down a steep ravine, snapping branches and pulverizing my ribs until the deep snow at the bottom arrested my fall. A stabbing pain in my side told me something was broken. I lay still for a long moment, trying to quiet my ragged breathing and listen for sounds of pursuit over the high keening of the wind. Silence. As I struggled to pull myself upright against the searing agony in my side, I slowly realized where I was. The abandoned Ojibwe camp, at the base of a towering limestone bluff reputed to be a physical doorway between this world and the spirit realm. Crumbling birch bark longhouses and ominous petroglyphs of monstrous entities had unnerved me since my early scouting missions, and I had given it a wide berth ever since. Now here I was, injured and unarmed, at the foot of this spiritual locust that I had been subconsciously avoiding. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the cliff face in a flash of teeth and eyes and antlered silhouettes, there and gone in an instant. The building storm made the forest groan and wail, deadfall creaking as if loaded with malicious weight. At the far end of the longhouse skeletons, I spotted a crevasse at the base of the limestone with a flicker of firelight emanating from within. A cave, shelter from the storm and the pacing monstrosity that lurked somewhere above. With a groan of pain, I dragged myself through the decaying remnants of the Ojibwe structures, trying not to imagine the Dogman bursting forth from the shadows of the longhouses like an ancient legend made manifest. Welcoming firelight spilled across trampled snow at the mouth of the cave, and as I limped closer, a wizened voice called out in greeting, "So, he has chased you here as well, Ranger?" A hunched Native American figure emerged, his face a map of creases, and his eyes dark and limitless with resigned wisdom. "The doorway grows restless. Come. There is much to discuss if you hope to survive the hunger of the Wendigo." The old man introduced himself as John Redtail, an Ojibwe elder and shaman who had spent his life studying the cursed history of the Dogman. As he tended to my wounds with poultices and chants, he wove a grim tapestry of the centuries-long blight upon his people and the land. The Dogman, he explained, was an ancient spirit of hunger and wintertime famine, a Wendigo that could possess animals or men through dark sorcery or acts of cannibalism. It had decimated the Ojibwe since their arrival in the forests, at times wiping out entire villages, and French trappers had named it the loup-garou, the werewolf that hunted the colonists. Now it seemed to be focusing its predations around Voyageurs Park and my cabin. The Wendigo grows stronger with each cycle, a malevolence building across generations, Redtail said gravely. Its hunger is insatiable, its bloodlust unquenchable. Bullets and fire only incense it. Only powerful magic and ritual can hope to defeat it. He motioned to the petroglyphs and cave paintings that adorned the walls, flickering in the firelight. Shamans brandishing fetishes and charms. A great horned figure with an X slashed across its chest, a series of concentric circles like a vortex. The doorway has opened between worlds. The Dogman passes freely now, corporeal and unstoppable, no longer confined to spiritual realms. The balance has been broken. We must put it back while there is still time. Redtail rummaged in a pouch and withdrew a small graven stone on a rag cord. It was inscribed with the same glyph of a horned figure with an X marked over its heart, and hummed with a strange, unearthly power. "Take this talisman, Ranger. It has shielded my lineage for generations. You must be the one to confront the beast at the height of its power. At moonrise we will invoke the ancient banishment rituals at the doorway above. You must bring the Wendigo here. And whatever happens, do not let it pass the threshold to the spirit world unopposed." He pressed the necklace into my trembling hand with an air of finality, his eyes sorrowful and steadfast. There was no refusing this quest. I had been drawn to this confrontation all my life, in every yearning for untamed places, in every nightmare of dark forests and glowing eyes. It was my obligation to the land and those I had sworn to protect from the ravenous hunger howling in the night. I rose unsteadily, the talisman a lead weight against my chest. There was no more running. I could only hope I had the strength and courage to defeat this primordial evil, or die trying at the edge of worlds both physical and spiritual. The fate of everything I held dear hung in the balance. Night fell like a death shroud over the forest as I emerged from the cave, Redtail's chants echoing behind me. The moon hung gravid and baleful, casting long shadows that writhed like living things. In the distance, a rising howl ululated across the treetops, emanating hunger and cruel ancient intelligence. The Dogman knew the hour of reckoning was at hand. I climbed the path to the top of the bluff with the fatalistic resolve of a man ascending a gallows. The claw-marked glyphs and carvings undulated in the moonlight as if possessed of their own eldritch life. At the center of the limestone shelf was a wide, shallow depression, ringed with standing stones, filled with brackish water that steamed in the icy air. The doorway between worlds, the spirit gate that I had to defend at all costs. A guttural roar shook the cliffs, and the Dogman emerged from the tree line, far more massive and distorted than it had appeared in the clearing. It trod on its hind legs like a man, its body a grotesque fusion of animal and human attributes. A furred barrel chest, a protruding wolf-like snout, clawed hands flexing with cruel dexterity. Its eyes flared green and otherworldly, drilling into me with ancient hunger. I raised the shaman's talisman before me, the stone thrumming with power in my grasp. The Dogman recoiled slightly, lips curling in a snarl over dagger teeth. The protective spell was anathema to its very essence. It lunged, crossing the distance between us in a single bound, claws extended for my throat. I rolled away at the last instant, the claws screeching against stone where my head had been. We circled each other like feral cats, feinting and swiping, seeking an opening. Below us, Redtail's voice rose in a fever pitch of chanting and invocation. Again and again the beast attacked, its frustration and fury building as the talisman repulsed it. I managed to strike a glancing blow across its snout with a rock, sending it reeling back with an enraged howl. But I was tiring quickly, my strength flagging from injury and exertion. The creature's stamina was inhuman, a rabid frenzy that would not stop until I lay in tattered pieces. The Dogman changed tactics, hurling itself bodily at me in an attempt to grapple me to the ground. We tumbled together in a snarl of fists and fur and hot, fetid breath, rolling perilously close to the tarry spirit pool in the center of the bluff. If it dragged me in, if it passed through that gate, with a burst of panicked strength, I seized its clawed hand as it clutched for the talisman around my neck. I felt the bones snap beneath my grip as I kicked out viciously, sending the Dogman stumbling backwards into the pool with an unearthly howl. The creature thrashed and writhed as the brackish water steamed and hissed, eating away its physical form like acid. The ancient spirit that possessed it, that had sustained its monstrous life for centuries, was being drawn inexorably back through the doorway between worlds. An agonized howl rose to an ear-splitting crescendo, a sound no earthly creature could make. The thing that had been the Dogman shrank and deflated, its furred bulk sloughing off in reeking sheets to expose pulsing red musculature and yellowed bone. Still it fought, clawing for purchase at the stone rim of the pool, its baleful eyes fixed on me with undiminished malice, even as its essence drained away. "Begone, Wendigo," Redtail's voice rang out, echoing from the cliff walls with otherworldly force. "You have no place in this realm. The balance will be restored." With a final tortured wail, the creature slipped beneath the surface of the roiling pool, its claws scrabbling futilely as it was dragged into the depths. The water churned and bubbled, then fell eerily still, a placid black mirror reflecting the merciless moon. An overwhelming silence descended, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the staccato drum of my heart. The night felt different, the air lighter, as if a smothering shroud had been lifted from the land itself. Distantly an owl hooted and leaves skittered across stone, mundane sounds that had been swallowed by the Dogman's malevolent presence for so long. I slumped to my knees in exhaustion and relief, clasping the shaman's talisman that had been the instrument of the beast's downfall. The stone felt cool now, quiescent, its purpose fulfilled. Far below I heard Redtail's approaching footsteps and joyous ululations in the language of his ancestors. It was over. The Dogman was banished, cast back to the spirit world from whence it came. The ancient ritual had held sway, and the monster that had haunted the land for generations was gone at last. But the scars it left behind would linger, on the landscape, on the people, and on my own psyche. I knew I would never again walk in wild places with the same carefree step, the same naive view of the wilderness as a benign playground. I had beheld the hungering soul of the forest, stripped bare, red in tooth and claw, and it had marked me, as surely as the dogman's own claws. I was a different man now, tempered by fire and fear, with an hard-won understanding of the primal forces that lurked in the liminal spaces between civilization and the wild. And that was the crux of the dogman's true nature, I realized. Not just a physical creature, but an embodiment of the untamed savagery that modern man had tried so hard to lock away and deny. It could never be destroyed, not completely, only pushed back to the fringes and kept in check by rights and resolve. As Redtail helped me to my feet, his face etched with solemn pride and vindication, I knew my work as a ranger had only begun. I would remain here watching over this sacred threshold, guarding against the day the dogman's fell spirit rose from murky depths to prowl the north woods once more. For the wild still called to me, even cloaked as it was in blood and shadow. I had to walk between those worlds and make peace with the hungry ghosts that roamed the marches. I was the watchman against the Wendigo now, and I could only pray I would be up to the task when it returned, stalking the borderlands between the natural and the supernatural, where mankind's dominion crumbled to dust and darkness, and only the strong and wary survived. But for now, the moon shone cold and clear. The night belonged to mortal creatures once more, and I welcomed its austere peace like an old friend. I took the job as a park ranger in the Olympic National Forest for the solitude, and to get away from my troubles back home in Seattle. Saddled with student loan debt and unable to find steady work with my degree in forestry, escaping to the vast green wilderness seemed like the perfect solution, at least for a while. The pay was meager but included rustic cabin housing deep in the old-growth forests and craggy peaks of the Olympic Mountains. I would be stationed at the Hoh Rainforest Ranger Outpost, over an hour drive from the closest hint of civilization. An introvert by nature who loved hiking, camping, and being immersed in nature, it seemed ideal. After a 2-day drive from the city, I arrived at the remote ranger station. The log cabin structure looked to be at least 50 years old, with moss and lichen covering the weathered timbers. Inside was sparse but functional. A potbelly wood stove for heat, a small propane fridge and stove. No electricity, no cell service, no internet. Perfect. Ranger Simmons, a gruff-bearded man in his mid-50s, gave me a terse orientation. Your job is to patrol and maintain the trails, keep campsites clean, provide information to hikers, and generally keep an eye on things out here. HQ checks in by radio once a day at 0800. Keep that radio charged and with you at all times. Lots of black bears and cougars in the area. Make noise, keep food sealed up tight, you'll be fine. Any questions? Nope, seems straightforward, I replied. Anything else I should know? Simmons fixed me with a level gaze, a flicker of something I couldn't interpret in his eyes. He hesitated, then said, Nothing really. Oh, if you see anything strange out there, just let HQ know. And with that, he hopped in his Forest Service Jeep and rumbled off down the dirt road, leaving me alone in the quiet wilderness. I fell into a peaceful routine at the Hoh Ranger Station, rising with the sun, doing trail maintenance and campsite checks, greeting the occasional backpacker, and relaxing in the evenings with my well-worn copy of Thoreau's Walden. After 2 uneventful weeks, I was making coffee one morning when the radio crackled to life. Olympic dispatch to Hoh Station, come in. Over. I grabbed the handset. Hoh Station, go ahead dispatch. Hoh, we've got a report of an overdue hiker, solo female, late 20s. Left Hoh Visitor Center 3 days ago, headed for Mount Tom Creek campsite. Was supposed to hike out yesterday, but her car is still at the trailhead. Can you go check the campsite and see if you can locate her? Over. Hoh copies. I'll head out shortly to search. We'll advise when located. Over. I had a quick breakfast, loaded up my pack, and set off on the trail. It was a 12-mile hike, gaining over 3,000 feet of elevation through dense forests and alpine meadows, to reach the remote Mount Tom Creek backcountry site. Arriving in the late afternoon, winded from the climb, I approached the cluster of campsites along the burbling creek. Right away, something seemed off. I noticed shredded scraps of bright blue fabric snagged on a blackberry bush. Upon closer inspection, I recognized it as part of a backpack. Further searching nearby revealed more torn pieces of clothing, an abandoned tent collapsed on its poles, and a canister of bear spray lying in the dirt. But no sign of the missing woman. I pulled out my radio. Ho to Olympic Dispatch. I've reached Mount Tom Creek campsite. It appears to be abandoned, but I found the missing hiker's gear. No sign of the individual herself. Numerous torn articles of clothing in the area. I'm going to do a wider search. Will advise if and when hiker is located. Over. Dispatch copies. Ho. Keep us informed. Out. I felt the first tingle of unease as I surveyed the abandoned camp and eerie quiet of the forest. What could have happened to this woman? Animal attack? Accident? I shook off dark thoughts and began methodically searching. For the next 2 hours until dusk, I combed the area, calling out for the hiker with no response. As night fell and I made camp, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from the darkness between the trees. I spent a restless night in my tent, plagued by strange dreams of being pursued through the forest by some unseen beast. The next morning, groggy and unsettled, I radioed dispatch to advise them I hadn't located the missing woman and would expand my search. Setting off at first light, I bushwhacked through dense underbrush, scanning the ground for any sign of human passage. After about an hour, I reached a small clearing near the creek and immediately noticed a putrid stench. Dread rising in my gut, I spotted a telltale smear of blood on a fern at the clearing's edge. Following the crimson trail with rising horror, my eyes fell upon a grisly scene. Torn flesh and clothing were strewn about, barely recognizable as human. A mauled arm here, a mangled leg there. The hiker had clearly met a violent end. I stumbled back, retching, trying to process the carnage. Then I noticed the footprints in the muddy creek bank. Massive prints with splayed, elongated toes, twice the size of any bear track I'd ever seen. No animal indigenous to the Olympics, that was for certain. The sight chilled my blood. Hands shaking, I radioed dispatch and reported the kill site and strange prints. They advised me to document the scene and extract myself carefully, in case the animal was still in the area. After photographing the tracks with trembling hands, I numbly bagged some tissue samples and began hiking back to the ranger station. My mind churned as I walked, trying to make sense of what I saw. By all evidence, the hiker had been brutally torn apart and partially consumed by an unknown creature. I've seen the aftermath of bear attacks, cougar kills. This was something far more savage. Something unnatural. Upon reaching the cabin, I uploaded and emailed the photos to headquarters, then sank onto my bunk in shock. What in God's name was I dealing with out here? The next few days were a blur of activity as a team of rangers and wildlife officials combed the area around the kill site. The strange tracks had disappeared by the time they arrived, washed away by the frequent rains. The off-the-record general consensus was that the woman had likely fallen victim to an unusually vicious cougar or bear attack. Her remains were gathered up and sent off to the coroner. The whole incident was kept carefully quiet, the public story being that she had died from a fall while solo hiking. Another sad but unremarkable tale from the wild, untamed Olympic backcountry. I knew better. I had seen those footprints. Twice the size of a human with hideously elongated and splayed toes. Profoundly unsettling and undeniably real. Despite racking my brain, I could come up with no reasonable explanation. In the days following the discovery, I became aware of furtive, hushed conversations between the older rangers, speaking in low voices, glancing over their shoulders. I caught snatches here and there. Just like the Wilson case back in '92. Never found all of him neither. Called it the Dogman. The name sent a chill up my spine. Dogman. Some kind of cryptid man-beast, local legend I hadn't been made privy to. The other rangers clammed up quickly when I tried to casually probe for details. There was a palpable blanket of fear and denial. I threw myself into researching old archives and microfiche on my next trip into town. I discovered a handful of other suspicious fatal animal attacks and disappearances in the area spanning decades, often with the same unsettling details: brutalized remains, gigantic unknown footprints, and a silently terrified population of rangers and locals. Upon returning to the host station, I began to feel a growing sense of dread and unease, like a constant prickling at the back of my neck. The looming trees that had once brought me such peace now seemed dark and menacing, full of lurking threat. Every nighttime rustle outside my cabin set my heart racing. What had I gotten myself into out here in these woods? I was determined to find out, even as the rational part of my mind screamed to flee and never look back. It happened on a misty gray morning 1 week after finding the hiker's remains. I was out on a trail doing routine maintenance about a mile from the ranger station. My mind wandered as I worked, still puzzling over the mystery. A series of snapping twigs in the underbrush to my left made me glance up sharply. I scanned the dense wall of green and brown, expecting to see a deer or raccoon. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then something shifted in the shadows between the hemlock trunks. In a patch of dappled sunlight breaking through the canopy, I saw it. A huge, dark, fur-covered shape, vaguely humanoid but grotesquely disproportioned. Jutting canine-like muzzle and ears, massive clawed hands hanging past bowed knees. It stood motionless maybe 50 yards away, staring directly at me. Every hair on my body rose in atavistic terror as I met its red-rimmed gaze through the morning mist. There was something hideously intelligent and aware in its eyes, a brutal cunning totally at odds with any normal forest creature. Adrenaline surging, I slowly and deliberately began backing down the trail, never taking my eyes from the thing in the trees. After I'd gone back maybe 20 paces, it shifted, turning its massive head to track my movement. That was enough for me. I spun and crashed off the trail, sprinting recklessly through the underbrush toward the cabin with a speed born of unadulterated fear. Low-hanging branches whipped my face and arms as I pelted through the forest, expecting at any second to hear the creature crashing through the brush behind me, to feel its hot breath and snapping jaws at my back. By some miracle, I reached the ranger station unaccosted, slamming through the door and collapsing, trembling onto the rough-hewn floor, my lungs heaving. After a few minutes, I collected myself enough to grab the radio with badly shaking hands. Ho, station to Olympic Dispatch, come in, over. This is Dispatch. Ho, what's your status? Over. Something out here, in the woods. Saw it with my own eyes. Not human. Send help. I gasped incoherently into the handset. Ho, station. I'm having trouble copying your traffic. Please repeat. Did you say you require assistance? Over. I took a deep, steadying breath, trying to marshal my wits. Who would believe my babbled report of a monster in the forest? The best I could hope for was to be relieved of duty for mental instability. At worst, I'd be a laughingstock. Disregard last dispatch transmission. All's well here. I thought I saw a bear, but it was nothing. Ho, out. Lowering the radio handset, I slumped onto my bunk. Every nerve in my body was buzzing with residual terror and confusion. My rational mind tried to reject what I had seen, but there was no denying the evidence of my own senses. The thing in the trees had been real, horribly, nightmarishly real. As evening fell, I paced back and forth in the tiny cabin like a caged animal, shotgun clutched tightly, jumping at every creak of timber and gust of wind through the eaves. What now? Make a break for civilization and abandon my post? Continue my research and try to obtain proof of this unthinkable creature's existence? Lure it in somehow and destroy it? The fading light outside the grimy windows provided no answers, only a growing sense of isolation and vulnerability. I had never felt more alone and exposed in my life. I didn't sleep at all that night, shotgun cradled and kerosene lantern burning until dawn, despite the wasteful expense. A dull, exhausted terror suffused me, momentarily spiking into heart-pounding adrenaline with every nighttime noise outside. Anticipating claws punching through the walls, jaws bursting through the window at any moment. By morning I felt strung out and twitchy, but resolved. I needed answers, and no one was going to provide them but me. Grim determination overrode my fear as I geared up and set off toward the creature's last known location, aiming to track it by the light of day. Reaching the spot on the trail where I'd had my chilling encounter, I cast about until I located a clear print in a patch of mud. The same unsettling splayed shape I'd photographed at the kill site. The track headed off the trail into a thickly wooded ravine. Taking a deep breath, I plunged into the brush, following the faint, meandering game trail of snapped twigs and disturbed vegetation. The canopy overhead grew more dense as I descended into the draw, blocking out the sun. An old logging road, abandoned and overgrown, snaked along the bottom. Then I saw it. Maybe 30 yards ahead, the creature loped across the old road and into the trees on the other side. My breath caught in my chest, and I froze, but it seemed not to notice me, continuing on until it vanished into the foliage. Heart hammering, I crept forward, scanning constantly and clutching my shotgun ready. There in the soft earth of the old roadbed was a line of fresh tracks, weaving back and forth but headed generally east. For the next 2 hours I tracked the thing, catching glimpses here and there between the trees, always keeping what I hoped was a safe distance. The rational part of my brain screamed that this was insanity, that I should break off and get the hell out of these woods. But I was in too deep. I had to know. Eventually, the game trail opened up into a small clearing dominated by a tumble-down shed, the remnants of some long-ago logging camp. The creature's prints led directly inside through a half-collapsed doorway. I darted into the cover of a giant fir and waited, peering through my binoculars. Movement in the shadows of the shed. A clawed hand, a canine snout, a flash of red eyes. So the creature had made this its lair. No wonder there had been so many kills and disappearances over the years in this area of the park. How many had this thing dragged back to this den of horrors to meet a grisly end? Suddenly its bulky head swung around, and I could have sworn its malevolent red gaze settled directly on my hiding spot. Shaking, I lowered the binoculars. Snap! The sharp crack of a branch behind me, very close. I spun, raising the shotgun. Too late. An impact like a battering ram smashed into my chest, knocking me to the ground. Claws raked fire across my face. Hot, rank breath roared in my nostrils. I screamed and twisted, trying desperately to bring the muzzle of the gun to bear, as a gaping maw filled with jagged teeth descended toward my throat. I woke, convulsing in the dirt, alone. Ragged clouds scudded across the cold moon overhead. My face and chest burned. I reached trembling fingers to my shredded shirt, expecting to find my skin rent to ribbons, my life's blood gushing out. But it came away clean and dry. Groggy and disoriented, I sat up, trying to take stock of my situation. How long had I been unconscious? Where was I? The events of the shed returned in a stomach-churning rush, and I staggered to my feet, wildly casting about for any sign of my attacker. But the night forest was silent and still. No trace of the creature. Even the dilapidated shed was nowhere to be seen. Just a dream? But it had seemed so real. I could still feel the white-hot slash of the thing's claws, smell its fetid breath. I shook my head, trying to clear it. A glint of metal on the ground caught my eye. There, snagged on a root, was an old rusted dog tag. I picked it up with trembling fingers, breath pluming in the chill air. Stamped on its pitted surface, C. Simmons. A coincidence, my exhausted mind a muddle, or something more? I tucked the tag in my pocket, unsure what to think. Slowly, wearily, I started making my way back to the ranger station under the cold, uncaring stars. Over the next few weeks, I turned that strange night over and over in my mind. A hallucination? A lucid nightmare brought on by stress and suggestion. I carefully avoided that area of the park. All remained maddeningly, eerily quiet. Then the weather turned, and an early blizzard blew in, effectively shutting down the backcountry for the winter. I gratefully hitched a ride back to civilization with the last group of rangers pulling out before the snow flew, bidding the Olympic wilderness goodbye, at least until the spring thaw. Sifting through my scant belongings while packing up the cabin, my fingers brushed the dog tag in my pocket, sending a renewed chill through me. On impulse, I looked up the name C. Simmons in the Ranger Service database back at headquarters. Craig Simmons, park ranger assigned to the host station from 1989 to 1992. Disappeared without a trace while on patrol in October 1992. Search efforts turned up no sign. Case gone cold. I leaned back in my chair, a creeping unease prickling my scalp. The same Simmons who had given me that cryptic warning my first day on the job all those months ago. The implications were staggering. Over the winter, I pored through dusty archives and forgotten reports, piecing together the fragmentary evidence of the creature's dark history in the park. Grainy photos, plaster casts of footprints, tales told by frightened locals around campfires, all of it pointing to a chilling, inescapable conclusion. This thing was real, and it had prowled the Olympics for generations. I knew what I had to do. I returned to the host station at first light on the vernal equinox, grim purpose icing my veins, loaded for bear with all the guns, traps, and arcane lore I could muster. I would find this creature, this Dogman, and put an end to its reign of terror in the forest, or die trying. The season was just beginning. My name is Jackie Lonsau, and I'm a park ranger in the remote wilderness of northern Minnesota. I've always loved the outdoors, hiking, camping, fishing in the pristine lakes and rivers. But my true passion is helping people. That's why I took this job with the Forest Service, despite the isolation and modest pay. I wanted to keep these wild spaces safe for visitors to enjoy. I live alone in a small cabin provided by the Park Service, nestled deep in the woods of Voyageurs National Park along the Canadian border. The vast forests of pine, spruce, and birch stretch endlessly in every direction, dotted with glacier-carved lakes. Bald eagles soar overhead. Moose and timber wolves roam the wilds. It's a beautiful but unforgiving place. When I'm not out on patrol or manning the visitor center, I spend my time reading, tying fishing flies, and chopping firewood for the long winter ahead. Though I'm only 32, I'm already one of the veteran rangers here. The solitude and demanding work tends to burn folks out quickly. It was an overcast fall day when I first heard the reports, just as the summer crowds were departing and an eerie quiet was settling over the park. A group of hikers failed to return from the backcountry. We mounted a search, assuming they had gotten turned around, or perhaps one had suffered an injury. But after 3 days scouring the woods, we found no trace of them. It was like they had vanished into thin air. I tried to tell myself it was just an anomaly, that there had to be some rational explanation. People got lost in the wilderness sometimes, sad as that was. But then more disappearances followed, always backpackers or hunters traveling alone or in pairs, always in the most remote corners of the park. And the few campsites we found had a disturbing similarity, tents shredded to ribbons, gear scattered and broken, as if ripped apart by some ferocious animal. But no tracks, no blood, no bodies. By the time the third group went missing, just before the snows began to fly, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more sinister at play. The other rangers whispered about the disappearances in hushed tones. Some blamed hungry bears or wolves, others hinted at darker explanations, an unknown animal, or perhaps something supernatural. As the winter closed in and the park emptied of visitors, I aimed to get to the bottom of the mystery. But nothing could have prepared me for the horrors lying in wait in the ice-bound darkness of the forest. Horrors that would haunt my dreams and make me question everything I thought I knew about the untamed wilderness I called home. The North Woods transformed into a crystalline wonderland of snow and ice, achingly beautiful but even more dangerous in winter's grip. As the only ranger staying on through the long off-season, it fell to me to continue the search for the missing hikers. I was performing a solo patrol on snowshoes miles from the nearest road when I stumbled upon it, a half-collapsed tent in a small clearing. My heart began to race as I called out, hoping against hope for any reply. Silence was the only answer. With mounting dread, I approached the ruined tent. Inside was a scene of utter devastation. The fabric was slashed to ribbons, the plastic poles snapped like twigs. Shredded pieces of a down sleeping bag fluttered in the icy breeze. Food canisters were crumpled like tin cans, and among the detritus, a backpack with the unmistakable deep crimson stains of dried blood. As an experienced ranger, I'd seen my share of animal attacks, but this was something altogether different. No bear or mountain lion could have wreaked such methodical destruction. Yet no human tracks disturbed the snow around the site. Just one set of footprints led away, bare human feet, disappearing into the forest. I reached for my radio to report the grisly find, but the battery had gone dead in the sub-zero cold. I realized with rising panic that I was miles away from help, with only a few hours of gray winter daylight remaining. I would have to follow the tracks, see if I could find this individual, clearly in dire straits, before nightfall, and deadly hypothermia set in for us both. The footprints wove erratically through the trees, as if whoever left them was lost or delirious. The unsettling wrongness of it all prickled at the back of my neck. A few hundred yards from the tent, I found strips of bloody fabric, torn pieces of clothing. Then one of the boots from the dismembered backpack gnawed and mangled. My heart pounded in my ears as I swept the beam of my flashlight through the lengthening shadows. That's when I heard it. A distant, mournful cry that was not quite human and not quite animal. A blood-curdling sound of anguish and unnatural hunger, drifting through the trees and freezing me to my very marrow. The wailing howl echoed through the forest, rising and falling in an alien cadence that made every hair on my neck stand at attention. Yet beneath the chilling animal timbre, I detected something disturbingly human, as if some tormented soul were crying out in unbearable agony. My instincts screamed to flee, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the unearthly din. But my sworn duty demanded the opposite. Someone was out here in the desolate wilderness, someone in great distress. I could not turn my back on them, even as foreboding squeezed my heart in an icy grip. With a deep breath to steel my nerves, I readied my bear spray and set off through the twilit snowscape, following the meandering barefoot tracks. As I moved deeper into the forest, the trees pressed close, skeletal branches grasping at my parka. Dusk gave way to sepulchral darkness beneath the spruce boughs. My flashlight seemed a feeble candle against the gloom. The wail sounded again, closer now. Ahead, the tracks ended abruptly at the foot of a huge fallen log. Gunmetal gray clouds scudded across the night sky. I caught a glimmer of movement in the inky shadows, something shifting, pacing. I raised my light and my breath caught in my throat. A hulking, fur-covered shape crept from behind a tree. It moved with an unsettling blend of animal and human characteristics, loping on its hind legs but dropping to all fours to sniff the air and snow. As it swung its head in my direction, eyes flashed in the darkness, fierce, intelligent eyes that sent an arctic chill down my spine. Slowly the creature stalked into the open on powerful digitigrade legs. In build it reminded me of a great bear. But no bear had ever stood so tall, or had limbs that tapered into almost hand-like paws. And the face, no animal had a face like that. Elongated jaws lined with jagged teeth, pointed ears, a wrinkled brow and snout covered in patchy mangy fur. And those glowing eyes, flickering with feral madness and a terrible human awareness. Mother of God, I breathed. For I knew the name of the abomination that stood before me, heretofore nothing more than a dark legend whispered around rangers' campfires. Dogman, werewolf. A creature that was neither man nor beast but some cursed amalgam of the two. And it had the scent of human blood on its muzzle. The beast and I faced each other across the frozen glade, the only sound the hammering of my heart. My hands trembled on the bear spray, but I held my ground, knowing it likely offered scant protection against this creature of myth and nightmare. The dogman's eyes bored into mine with a terrifying fusion of animal ferocity and human calculation. Strings of saliva dripped from its bared fangs, and its breath puffed in the frigid air. The stink of wet fur, urine, and rotten meat rolled off it, the unmitigated reek of a predator. Yet I saw something more in those hellish eyes: torment, confusion, a trapped intelligence that knew itself as an abomination and hated what it had become. In that moment I realized the truth. This was no mere animal. Buried beneath the snapping jaws and fur and claws was a human being, someone who had fallen victim to an ancient, unspeakable curse. My mind spun with the old legends of men bitten by wolves, transformed into bloodthirsty beasts beneath the full moon, condemned to hunt and slay, slaves to an eternal lycanthropic hunger. Could there be any truth to those lurid old tales? Had the missing hikers met such a doom, and now their numbers included the wretched soul before me? "Please," I said softly, "I don't want to hurt you. I know there is a human in there. Let me help you." My words sparked a doleful whine from the hybrid throat. For a heart-stopping moment I thought I glimpsed a flicker of humanity in those amber orbs. But then it was gone, swallowed by the slavering beast. The dogman lunged. I fired the bear spray, but the creature moved with blurring speed. A massive paw swiped a canister from my grip. I fell backward into the snow as the monster towered over me, blotting out the night sky. This was the end, I thought as I stared into the maelstrom of teeth and eyes and reeking breath. I would be ripped to bloody shreds, another victim of the hungry evil stalking this forest. But the killing strike never fell. From the darkness rang out an explosive crack and a blinding muzzle flash. The dogman yelped and staggered, a ragged hole punched in its chest. Another shot boomed and the beast crumpled into the blood-stained snow. A man's silhouette emerged from the trees, a hunting rifle leveled at the still twitching form. "What in God's name?" I croaked, dragging myself upright on numb legs. The man racked the bolt on his gun and fixed me with a haunted stare. His grizzled face was lined and weathered, a week's growth of beard frosting his cheeks. Layers of filthy clothing hung off his spare frame. But it was his eyes that seized me, eyes that had gazed into the abyss and been forever changed. "You're damn lucky," the man growled. "That was a juvenile out hunting solo. If the pack had been with it, you'd be meat. Seen it happen before." I looked from him to the dead beast oozing crimson into the snow, my mind reeling. The man saw the question in my eyes and gave a bitter laugh. "Dogmen, Ranger, werewolves, the legions of the damned moon. And there are more out there, many more. This is only the beginning." The old hunter's name was Josiah Cobb, and his story chilled me more than the wind knifing through the pines. He spoke of an ancient battle between the forces of the civilized world and the twisted children of the moon, of men and women cursed to walk the line between human and beast, giving into to their feral natures when the moon waxed full. According to Josiah, the dogmen had prowled the great northern forests for centuries. Sometimes they were called werewolves, other times loup-garou or skinwalkers. But they were all the savage progeny of the same blasphemous bloodline. For generations, men like Josiah fought a secret war against the horrors in the woods, putting silver bullets in the hearts of any human foolish or unlucky enough to survive the bite and transformation. It was a brutal calculus, but one he insisted was necessary. "They can't control the hunger," Josiah explained as we sat before a fire at one of his hidden camps. "They'll kill and kill, sparing not man, woman, nor child. Sprees of animal attacks, missing hikers, mutilated livestock. It's them, Ranger, the dogmen." "But there has to be another way," I protested. "A cure, if they're human underneath." The old man cut me off with a scowl. "Don't be a sentimental fool. The human is gone, nothing but a shell for the beast. I know too well." He met my eyes and I knew with numb certainty how he had come by his terrible knowledge. Why one eye was milky white and dead, bisected by a trio of vicious claw marks. Josiah told of his own run-ins with the dogman over the decades, each more harrowing than the last, of hunting down the creatures before they could ravage the innocent, of lonely battles beneath the bloated moon in the wildest corners of the forest. He claimed there was a whole pack stalking the park now, the largest and most organized he had ever seen, a pack with an agenda. "They're doing something to the Wichita Falls," the old hunter said. "Something bad. Them falls were holy to the local tribes. Place of strong medicine. I think the dogmen mean to turn them, or the little lake they fill, twist them to their purposes." It sounded like madness. But after seeing that slain beast in the flesh, feeling the void of inhumanity in its gaze, I knew I had passed through the looking glass into a darker world, one where the old tales were terribly true. Josiah wanted my help. He saw me as a potential ally in his crusade, another soldier in this twilight struggle between the last bastions of humanity and the beast within. I didn't want to believe, but as a ranger I had sworn an oath to protect these lands and those who visited them, even against a threat as mind-bending as this. So as that long winter night pressed close with all its primal menace, I found myself agreeing to stand against the legions of the damned moon, no matter where that twisted path might lead. The snow lay thick and silent over the wilderness. The night pressed close, gravid with a sense of gathering malice. Clouds churned across the swollen face of the moon, at times plunging the forest into Stygian gloom. The lights of civilization seemed a faint and fading dream. Out here, in the untamed heart of the land, older laws held sway. I crept after Josiah on our snowshoes, the drifts muffling our passage. We were clad in winter camouflage, faces darkened with grease paint. The old hunter had armed me with a heavy revolver, the chambers loaded with hand-cast silver bullets. The gun felt strange and deadly in my palm. We had abandoned all pretense of my duties as a ranger. Tonight we were soldiers in a more primal war. Our destination was a box canyon in the remotest reaches of the park. There, the Wickamaw Falls plunged over a high cliff into a bone-chilling pool before draining into Wickamaw Creek. In summer the falls were a paradise of mist and verdant life, but now, in the depths of winter, they had the frozen aspect of a Norse underworld. As we drew closer, the hackles on my neck began to prickle. Though the night lay frozen and still, some nameless threat charged the air. I recalled the old hunter's dire words. The Dogmen were enacting some twisted ritual at the falls, tainting the sacred place with their wanton savagery. Snowflakes swirled on a sudden fitful breeze, carrying a charnel scent. We reached the cliff tops overlooking the falls, and Josiah motioned me down. Peering through a screen of snow-laden pines, I beheld a sight that would forever haunt my most fevered nightmares. The frozen falls were shrouded in flickering auroras of corpse light, eldritch colors that belonged to no wholesome spectrum. The trees below were hung with obscene fetishes, animal bones, dead birds, coils of intestines. A profane altar of blood-stained stone stood before the plunge pool. Upon it was bound the hideously mutilated corpse of an enormous bull moose, its throat slit from ear to ear. Dark figures capered and howled around the altar, their voices lifted in a fevered dream cacophony. In the guttering light I could make out their twisted forms, amalgams of man and wolf, their bodies contorted in the agonized metamorphosis of the change. Here, muzzles elongated from human faces, their talons burst from gnarled fingers. Eyes flashed like jack-o'-lanterns in the night. It was as if a gateway to hell had yawned open in the depths of the forest, vomiting forth its nightmares. Two figures dominated the mad dance. A pair of dogmen loomed over the rest, one black as pitch and one white as bone. They had the look of humanoid dire wolves, massively muscled and furred. Unlike the others, which seemed lost to their animal savagery, this duo moved with a terrible sentience. I knew then I looked upon the alpha pair. The ebon beast dipped a crude chalice into the steam-wreathed pool, lifted it to the bloated moon, and howled. The pack answered in kind, a atavistic chorus chilling in its intensity. The ivory monster raised a gleaming knife carved from some obsidian stone and plunged. The ivory monster raised a gleaming knife carved from some obsidian stone and plunged it into the steaming guts of the moose. With guttural incantations it worked the blade in arcane signs, painting occult sigils in blood and gore. As it did so, the cavorting horde grew ever more frenzied, yowling and groaning like the damned. The air pulsed with a palpable sense of wrongness, as if the very fabric of reality strained at the seams. Suddenly the white wolf threw back its head and bellowed. The air rippled, and a seething gateway of whirling shadows coalesced above the stone altar. Noxious mists poured from the void, and I felt the first lethargic pull of the growing portal, like the undertow of some black cosmic ocean. The dogmen howled in savage ecstasy. "God help us all," Josiah breathed. "They're opening a way to loose their damned kind on the world." "We have to stop them," I said through the bile rising in my throat. "Close that thing." The old hunter's grim visage hardened into a mask of resolve. He unslung his rifle and chambered around. "I reckon this is it then, Ranger. The hour of the wolf, the final battle. You with me?" I met his eyes and nodded, steeling myself against the black tide of horror and despair that threatened to drown my mind. With trembling hands I checked the load in the unfamiliar revolver. Side by side we rose, Josiah's rifle and my pistol seeking targets in the maelstrom below. As one we opened fire. Muzzle flashes lit the night like the strobe of a lightning storm. Silver bullets whined and ricocheted among the rocks. Yelps and snarls of pain rewarded our efforts. Black blood sprayed the virgin snow. But it wasn't enough. Even as their fellows fell, the alpha pair continued their ministrations. The hellish gateway yawned ever wider, disgorging nightmares born of mankind's most primeval fears, things that had no place in a sane world. "The pool," Josiah cried over the eldritch din. "The portal is anchored in its waters, tainted by their blood magic. We have to disrupt the ritual." I understood in a flash of grim insight. Jolting to my feet, I leapt from the cliff, revolver barking. The bullet struck the ebon wolf, and it stumbled, fouling the hex. I hit the icy shallows in an explosion of spray and charged the altar. The obsidian knife lay on the crimson-spattered stone. I scooped it up in my free hand and plunged into the pool. The water was cold as the grave, sapping my strength and flooding my veins with the poison of the unnatural. But I pushed forward, into the unclean froth boiling around the submerged portal. With an inarticulate cry to the soaring peaks and unyielding wilderness that had long sheltered these ancient horrors, I slashed the blade across my palm. Vital red mixed with the black filth, and I thrust my bleeding hand into the raging void. The effect was instant and catastrophic. The gateway shuddered like a living thing, pulsing and writhing as if in pain. The dogman howled, a sound of fury and despair that shook the earth. For an eternal moment I was a mote of mortal flesh and bone straddling worlds, suspended between the realm of humanity and the hinterlands of darkest myth. An eon passed in the space of a frozen heartbeat. Then, with a deafening roar, the portal collapsed in on itself, taking its nightmares with it. An unseen shockwave blasted out from the altar, leveling trees, hurling the howling dogmen into the air. I was smashed back into the shallows as the pool emptied in a massive geyser, the taint washed clean. When I could see again, Josiah stood at the water's edge, his gun smoking. The bodies of our foes lay crumpled and twitching in the ruin. Of the two alphas there was no sign. I dragged myself from the pool, shivering and bloody, but filled with the light of victory. We had stopped them, defeated the dark designs of the wolf cult. Josiah clasped my shoulder, his ancient eyes glinting with solemn pride. "You did good, son," he croaked. "Real good. Not many men have walked into the jaws of evil like that and come back. I think these old woods are a sight safer tonight." "What about the rest of them?" I asked through chattering teeth. "The ones who got away?" He cocked his head to the brooding forest, listening to the whispers of the night wind. "Oh, I reckon they'll think twice before showing their ugly snouts around here again. We gave them one hell of a black eye, though no doubt they're still out there waiting, like they always have." Josiah stamped his feet in the bloody snow, a rueful smile touching the scars on his weathered face. "But that's a worry for another day, another hunter. Tonight, let's just thank the good Lord that we sent those sons of bitches back to hell. And then I don't know about you, but I could use a good stiff drink." We shared a haggard laugh as the moon broke from the racing clouds. But as I followed the old man back into the forest, I couldn't help a last glance over my shoulder, to the dark hills and the darkling trees. Somewhere out there, I knew, the ancient evil of the dogmen lurked still, licking their wounds and dreaming of vengeance. The words of the old song my Irish grandmother used to sing came to me then, in that moment of exhausted elation and lingering dread. "Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the moon is full and bright." I shivered for more than the cold and turned away into the sheltering trees. In the years ahead there would be time to ponder those words and their dread import. But for that one night at least, the forces of light had held back the tide of darkness. The good folk of the world could sleep safe in their beds. But as for me, the park ranger who had gazed upon the true face of the untamed wild, I knew my nights would be forever haunted by glowing eyes and lupine howls drifting on the north wind. For I had learnt the truth so many seek to deny, that we are not alone in the deep woods and the dark beyond the circle of our fires, and I would never forget. My name is Ethan Wright, and I never believed the old tales. Growing up in a small Oregon town nestled against the misty forests of the Cascade Mountains, you hear a lot of weird stories. Loggers and hunters would huddle together over beers, spinning yarns about strange creatures stalking the woods. The Dogman, they called it, half man, half beast, loping through the forest on two legs, searching for prey with glowing red eyes. I always wrote it off as backwoods superstition, campfire tales to scare wide-eyed kids. At least that's what I thought before I started this damn job. Fresh out of college with a degree in forestry and a mountain of student loan debt, I was desperate for work. Park ranger gigs were few and far between, especially ones that provided housing. So when I landed a post at a remote wilderness area deep in the Cascades, I jumped at the chance. I'd be living alone in a small ranger cabin, responsible for monitoring trails and campsites scattered across thousands of acres of rugged forest. On paper, it sounded perfect. Quiet, solitary work in the great outdoors, a chance to put my education to use while chipping away at my loans. I loaded up my trusty old Subaru with gear and headed into the mountains, the scent of pine needles and petrichor beckoning me through the open windows. But that first night alone in the cabin, listening to the ancient trees creak and groan in the darkness, a shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. There was something otherworldly about how the moonlight filtered through the branches, how the blackness between the tree trunks seemed to ripple and writhe. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination, stoked by one too many Reddit horror threads binged late at night. Plus, the joint I'd smoked on the drive up probably didn't help. As I drifted off to sleep in the narrow wooden bunk, I told myself this was the start of an adventure. If only I knew then just how right I was. My first few weeks as a ranger passed uneventfully. I fell into a steady rhythm. Up at dawn, hike a section of trail, clear any fallen trees or rock slides, check the campsites for garbage, haze the occasional bear, back to the cabin by dusk. Rinse and repeat. It was grueling work, especially for a city kid whose idea of exercise was walking to the corner bodega. But as my muscles hardened and my stamina grew, I started to relish the long days immersed in nature. There was a raw, untamed beauty to this forest that stirred something primal in my soul. At night I'd sip bourbon on the cabin's sagging porch, letting the hooting owls and chirping crickets lull me into drowsy contentment. Exhausted from miles of hiking, I slept like the dead, undisturbed by the groaning timbers and skittering critters in the walls, until the night I heard the scream. It pierced the velvet dark sometime after midnight, shocking me from a deep slumber. Heart pounding, I sat bolt upright, straining to hear over the blood rushing in my ears. The cry echoed off the hills, fading into eerie silence. Coyote, I thought, fumbling for the flashlight next to my bunk. Probably took down a rabbit or a fawn. As I padded on shaky legs to the front door, a small voice in the back of my head whispered that no coyote had ever sounded so human, so anguished. I stepped onto the porch, the old boards protesting under my bare feet. I swept the flashlight beam over the clearing, but saw only swaying pines and impenetrable shadow. The forest had fallen unnaturally still, even the crickets shocked into silence. In the distance, an owl hooted a forlorn warning. Skin prickling with goosebumps, I dove back inside the cabin, slamming the door behind me as if to barricade myself against the night. I didn't sleep a wink after that, lying frozen in my bunk until the first pale fingers of dawn crept through the windows. I know how crazy this all sounds. If I hadn't lived through it myself, I'd think it was just another creepypasta dreamed up by some basement-dwelling neckbeard. But I swear on my grandpa's grave that every word is true. Strange things started happening after that night. On my daily hikes, I'd find trees gouged with deep claw marks, the scars oozing sticky sap like blood. Campsites that I knew had been empty the day before suddenly looked like a tornado had ripped through, tents shredded and coolers overturned, the ground churned up by massive paw prints. But no tracks leading in or out, as if whatever made them had simply materialized and vanished into thin air. I radioed the main ranger station, trying to keep the fear out of my voice as I described the damage. They assured me it was just an unusually active bear and advised me to be vigilant about proper food storage. But I knew in my gut this was no bear. Bears didn't walk on two legs. Sleep became a rare luxury. Every night brought new terrors, inhuman shrieks splitting the darkness, heavy footfalls crunching in the underbrush, the unmistakable sensation of being watched from the tree line. I started to dread the setting sun, knowing the horrors it would bring. I thought about requesting a transfer, finding a gig that wouldn't leave me a gibbering wreck. But some twisted sense of duty kept me chained to my post. If there really was something out there, I had to protect the campers, oblivious families just looking for a peaceful nature getaway. The guilt of abandoning them to an unknown threat gnawed at me. And if I'm being totally honest, there was a dark fascination to it all, the same morbid curiosity that glues your eyes to a car wreck or a slasher flick. A lifetime of logic and reason crumbling under the impossible made real. Or maybe I was just losing my mind out there, a few trees short of a forest. A small part of me hoped insanity was the answer. The alternative was too horrifying to consider. I'll never forget that morning in early October. I was hiking a remote section of trail, the first frost crunching under my boots, when I caught a whiff of something rank on the breeze. My stomach clenched at the unmistakable stench of decay. Dread pooled in my gut as I followed my nose off the path, pushing through a dense tangle of devil's club and huckleberry. About 50 yards in, I stumbled into a small glade and stopped dead, bile surging into my throat. It was a black bear, or what was left of one. The carcass had been savagely mutilated, matted fur barely clinging to splintered bones picked clean of flesh. Viscera painted the yellowish grass a muddy crimson, but it was the head that turned my knees to jelly. It had been torn clean off and mounted on a stake like some sort of macabre trophy. I staggered back to the trail and puked my guts out, tears and snot mixing with the vomit. The wrongness of it all crashed over me in a nauseating wave. This was no predation, no territorial spat between apex killers. It was desecration, a deliberate act of malice, of evil. I should have called it in, should have requested backup and handed this nightmare off to someone else. But I didn't. Misplaced responsibility, a martyr complex, the hubris of a man too proud to admit he was in over his head. Who knows? All I knew was that I couldn't walk away now. Not until I saw this through to its inevitable dark end. I stumbled back to the cabin in a daze, hardly registering the crimson smears marring my jeans. As I stood under the scalding spray of the shower, trying to scrub away the feel of that place, an icy certainty crystallized in my gut. The Dogman wasn't content to terrorize from a distance anymore, to mark his domain in gouges and broken branches. He had issued a challenge, a savage declaration of war. In ripping out the bear's throat, he had called me out directly, dared me to meet him on the blood-soaked battlefield of these ancient woods. And God help me, I was going to answer. I barely recognized myself in the days that followed, poring over tattered maps and supply lists with a grim, obsessive focus. If I was going to confront this thing, I'd do it on my terms, in my element. I sketched out a plan, marking the most likely places the creature would prowl. Isolated glens and rushing brooks far from established trails, prime hunting grounds for unwary prey. I'd hike in at dusk, find an elevated spot downwind, and hunker down to wait, my dad's old hunting rifle clutched white-knuckle tight. My supervisor radioed to ask why I'd missed my last 3 check-ins, his voice crackling with equal parts irritation and concern. I mumbled something about a migraine and promised to make my rounds tomorrow. The lie tasted like ashes in my mouth. Night after night I sat shivering under an inky sky, senses stretched taut as piano wire, jumping at every rustle of dry leaves. The waiting was the worst part, huddled in the dark with only my spiraling thoughts for company. I wondered what everyone back home would think when they found my gnawed bones scattered in the brush. Would they call me brave or just plain stupid? On the 5th night, I finally found what I was looking for, or rather, it found me. I was hunkered in the crook of an ancient spruce when the skin on the back of my neck prickled with that unmistakable sensation of being watched. I eased the rifle to my shoulder with fingers numb from cold, fighting the urge to bolt like a startled deer. Across the clearing, 2 points of red light glowed in the shadows, smoldering like the embers of a dying fire. They swayed in the darkness, too high off the ground for any normal predator, and my blood turned to ice water in my veins. As my eyes adjusted, I could just make out the hulking silhouette crouched between the trees, more beast than man. Time seemed to slow to a crawl, each heartbeat thundering in my ears as we regarded each other across that pitiless void. In that eternal moment, I saw my death reflected in those hellish eyes, and all my vaunted courage withered to ash in my mouth. Then it was moving, charging from the shadows with terrible speed, huge strides eating up the distance between us. Blind terror overtook me, and I bolted, crashing through the brush like a man possessed. Razor briars shredded my face and arms, but I hardly felt them, every cell in my body screaming one primal command: run! I fled in a blind panic, heedless of direction, the creature's guttural snarls dogging my heels. My foot caught on a gnarled root, and I went sprawling, tasting copper as my head cracked against a rock. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was a flash of matted fur and yellow fangs in the moonlight, my own blood black on the dead leaves. Then, nothing. I awoke to agony, each shallow breath lancing through my chest like a bolt of lightning. Something warm and wet trickled into my eyes, and I raised a leaden hand to the back of my skull, wincing at the gash my fingers found there. Memory came flooding back in a nauseating rush, the monster bursting from the night, the hellish chase through the woods, the sickening crack as my head struck stone. But if I was alive, then where? My blood turned to ice as a guttural huff cut through the gloom off to my left, so close I could smell the carrion reek of its breath. Whimpering, I dragged myself backwards through the mulch until my spine met rough bark, scrabbling for a weapon with hands that shook uncontrollably. It crouched just beyond the reach of the feeble moonlight, two hellish eyes watching me from the abyss. The creature had me dead to rights, a lamed rabbit cowering before the wolf, and yet it hesitated. I couldn't fathom why it didn't just lunge forward and rip out my throat, end this sick game once and for all. "What do you want?" I croaked through a throat cracked and dry as ancient parchment. A sob hitched in my chest as those red eyes flared, and I squeezed my own shut, certain my last moment had arrived. "Please," I choked out, beyond all reason or pride. "Please, God, no." A pregnant beat, the forest holding its breath. Then the soft crunch of dead leaves, fading into the dark. I risked a glance and nearly wept at the empty clearing, no trace of the beast save a few broken twigs. It took hours for me to limp back to the cabin, each step a small eternity of torment. In the thin gray light of dawn, the night's events took on a hazy quality, more fever dream than reality. Only the egg-sized lump on my skull and blood crusting my clothes stood as testament to the truth of it all. I spent that day in a fog, trying desperately to square the impossible with the undeniable evidence of my senses. But one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. This thing, this Dogman, could have killed me, should have killed me, and yet it hadn't. As much as that realization chilled me to the core, it also lit a small, desperate fire in my chest. If this creature was more than just a mindless killing machine, if there was some spark of intelligence or intent behind those burning eyes, then maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this nightmare, a way to understand it, to drive it back to whatever pit spawned it. I knew then what I had to do. As I hefted the heavy rucksack over my shoulders, wincing as it pressed on purpling bruises, I squinted at the sinking sun through the pines. Those woods had become my whole world these past months, my tormentor, my muse, and now my salvation or my doom. I shrugged off the last tendrils of fear, grim determination settling over me like a mantle. There could be no half measures anymore, no more cowering behind locked doors and jumping at shadows. The Dogman had thrown down the gauntlet, a challenge primal and pure. As I melted into the darkening trees, one thought beat a steady tattoo inside my skull, drowning out all others. Let the hunt begin. Thank you for listening to Night Whispers. If the shadows kept you company tonight, leave a comment. Tell me where in the world you're listening from. And if you're brave enough, like, subscribe, and come back next time. Just don't follow the voice in the trees.